How technology has so changed our world over the last 40 years or so. I listed out for you last Sunday 25 different significant advances that happened in that 40-year period that's changed our world during our generation. We talked about having a Hebrew understanding of generations, which in the Bible, when a generation is referred to, it can mean 40 years, 70 years, or 100 years. If you're not sure what that means, you can go watch last Sunday and you'll find out. But seriously, that is kind of the context for our understanding as we're looking at this subject of Generation Mission, and as we begin to unpack together, what is it that God is saying to us in all of this? Interesting. Since 1983, all these changes we talked about, and really there were only about 3 that have happened since the first of what is the youngest generation, the Alpha generation, has been born. So what that means is for that group, their pretty much entire lives, they've enjoyed all the technology that we talked about last week. They don't know a world that doesn't have it. Now, for our builder generation, a lot of you were over the age of 40 when the first of those things began to happen. And so much of life had already transpired by the time those things happened. And if you're in the builder generation, you may have been in your 60s before there was such a thing as an iPhone. The rest of us are caught somewhere sandwiched in the middle of all that, because I still remember really well that there were phones that were rotary phones. I remember when those went from only being available in black. It's kind of like the old Henry Ford statement, you can have any color you want of car as long as it's black. That's how it was with phones years ago. And then there were the great new phone innovations that came out. Probably the only time I ever wanted to be a girl was when they came out with the Princess phones. Those just look so cute. Don't worry if you're panicking. It wasn't a huge issue for me. I've gotten over it. I only have 4 of them still at my house. But really, it's one of those things that as we deal with life, it's interesting how that has so changed everything. And today I really want to focus on maximizing generational diversity. Currently, there are 6 living, what would be defined generations that are a part of this bigger generation that would be somewhere in that 70 to 100 year range of the total picture of things. And that really works from people who are all the way from what would be the builder generation to this youngest group, the Alpha generation, and those in between. It's interesting. A couple weeks ago on Generation Sunday, to watch and see bridgings of generations, to look and see our own Pastor Joe, and he would be slightly millennial, right, in the looking at that world. And then you had Isaac up here with you. Would Isaac be Alpha or, yeah. So, I'm pretty good at this. I'm amazed. And so you saw that already happening. And then you had me, and just for any of you that may have thought differently, I am not a builder, I'm a boomer. I have the hair to be a builder, but I'm a boomer. But anyway, all of that is part of us. Now, in just a couple of weeks, we're going to be praying over them next Sunday. Ray and a whole group of guys are going to the Dominican Republic to do a building missions trip. In that trip, in that group, there's going to be folks from millennial, Gen X, Boomer, and Builder working together. Pray for them. No, they're going to do great. It's going to be a great opportunity to take that mix of whole thinking and functioning, and we're going to see God do a wonderful thing through that. And then just a couple of weeks beyond that, Pastor Joe is going to take a group back over to San Francisco to be a part of Urban Exchange Outreach there, and that is going to primarily be Gen Z representation, but I think we actually have an alpha in that mix as well. So all the generations of LifeBridge are going to be represented on missions in the next few days here at LifeBridge. Isn't that exciting? Wonderful to see how God's working and what He's doing. And so today I want us to talk about how do we maximize this. There's a great verse or verses in 2 Timothy chapter 1 where Paul is talking to Timothy, who is like a spiritual son to Paul. He was a spiritual son to Paul. He says, "You know that I've been called to serve the God of my fathers with a clean conscience. Night and day I pray constantly for you, building a memorial for you with my prayers. I know that you've wept for me, your spiritual father, and your tears are dear to me. I can't wait to see you again. I'm filled with joy as I think of your strong faith that was passed down through your family line. It began with your grandmother Lois, who passed it on to your dear mother Eunice, and it's clear that you too are following in the footsteps of their godly example. I'm writing to encourage you to fan into a flame and rekindle the fire of the spiritual gift God imparted to you when I laid my hands on you, for God will never give you the spirit of fear, but the Holy Spirit who gives you mighty power, love, and self-control." Generation to generation, different ages, even different gender, and yet the same Spirit. That's the glue, that's the bond that brings us together and holds us together. So today, I want to unpack a little bit on the different generations and what does that look like? How would you describe what maybe are the attributes or characteristics or things that would kind of help us understand this whole idea of the different generations a part of our current living generation. So I've asked Pastor Joe, Pastor Sarah to help me today. Pastor Joe's going to come first. He's going to talk to you about Gen Alpha, Gen Z, and then Pastor Sarah's going to talk to you about millennials and Gen X.
All right, good morning. We got to make room on this table here. Okay. Mine's bigger. All right. So I'm going to talk about Gen Alpha and Gen Z just a little bit. I think it's just good to have an awareness of, should I say, what we're dealing with. I mean, but that's probably not the best way to say it, but that's what it's going to be. So Gen Alpha, generally from 2010 to today is their age range. I don't know when it ends, but 2010 to 2024. There's not much, as you can imagine, information on Gen Alpha yet, because they're a really, really young generation. So not a lot of studies have been done, not a lot of research has been conducted. It's basically too early to tell what is going to distinguish this generation. But I've come up with a couple things that I think, as we look back in history, here's going to be some markers of Gen Alpha, is they will be the AI generation, which means artificial intelligence. Whereas Gen Z was the smartphone generation. They grew up, don't know a day without a smartphone technology or something like that. Gen Alpha is going to be the AI generation, where AI is just going to be a part of their lives. Right now, we understand what AI is. Everyone's used it to some degree or another. Gen Alpha, it's going to be, this is how we function, this is how we live. It's a part of with AI. The second thing is, I imagine that they will be the virtual reality generation. VR is maybe you've seen the headsets, you put them on and then you can play games and be interactive. I imagine Gen Alpha is going to be the generation where virtual reality is another form of their reality, to where it's no longer a game, but there's this is a part of who we are. There's movies out about it, right? About this futuristic living in this world that is not my own, but it's almost a preferred reality. Gen Alpha, I don't know if that's where they'll be, but it will be so unique to who they are that AI and virtual reality is going to be a part of this generation. Now, Gen Z, there's lots of studies done on Gen Z, as you can imagine. They're the largest generation to date. There's more Gen Zs than any other generation prior. And they're very unique, right? A lot of you are thinking, yeah, they're unique. They're unique, all right. 1995 to 2010 or so, right? The different studies vary on when Gen Z actually became a generation. Give or take a year or two, 1995 to 2010. So as Pastor Bo mentioned, we're taking at least one Gen Alpha to San Francisco, and then there will be Gen Zs represented, there will be Millennials represented, there will be Gen X represented, and I think that's it. But that's a wide range of generations represented on mission there. Gen Z is the first generation raised on smartphones. Now most of us will have a smartphone by now. I'm a millennial. I can remember the rotary phone in the house, and then I remember getting the brick cell phone, right? There was the cell phones that were bricks or flip phones for a long time before there were actually smartphones. Gen Z, they've had smartphone power in the palm of their hand. Basically what that means is any information they need whenever they want it, they can have. Now imagine how that affects someone's psychological development. Any information you need whenever you want it is at the palm of your hands. Good and bad. We can all think of ways that could be bad, and maybe even ways that could be good. But here's one of the side effects of that is this is also the most anxious generation of all time. And you wonder why when previous generations went off to war at 16, 17, and 18, how is this generation more anxious than them? Well, it's because of that information. Think about it. When maybe you were younger, even when I was younger, you got your news in doses, right? What's going on around the world in doses. When you have information in the palm of your hands, you get news every day. Another mass shooting, another war, another country invaded, another country, another natural disaster. Basically what this means is that any given moment, the whole world is going to fall apart. Anxiety level increases, right? Not to mention the pressures. Here's what everyone else is doing your age. Here's what you should be doing. Here's another study that says this. Here's what all the people going to college are achieving. Here's what the people going to trade schools are achieving. It's information overload. So that's a negative side effect of having unlimited information in the palm of your hand all the time. Over half say they expect the worst to happen. So in a poll done in Gen Z recently, 56% say they expect the worst is going to happen. They're not the most optimistic generation of all time. But can you blame them? They've also been called the coronials because in their developmental years was the coronavirus, right? Whereas my generation, our developmental years was 9/11. Gen Z, their developmental years, they experienced the coronavirus. How does that affect them when their whole routines, their whole worlds are turned upside down overnight? Now they're no longer able to be with their friends in school. They have to adapt and become virtual learners. At the same time, the rest of the world has to adapt. So as young teenagers, young people, they're having to figure out how to do new things, but none of their peers or elders in their lives understand how to adapt and work through this as well. So everybody's trying to figure out how to navigate this. They're just in a more developmentally vulnerable state when that happens. So they're the coronials. But because of the coronavirus, here's what we get with Gen Z is they feel a sense of self-responsibility and the importance of taking care of others. Right? That's one thing that the coronavirus taught many of us is it's not just about me now, it's about others. How are my actions going to impact other people? Right? And this is a Gen Z distinctive in that this is already who they are. It's not about me, it's about we, right? It's not about what I can achieve, it's about what you can achieve. It's not about what I feel, it's also about how my actions are going to impact how you feel. right? This isn't just a result of the coronavirus. This is who they are. This is a unique thing about Gen Z. It's a strong concern for everyone else, all right, which is why they are non-confrontational, generally speaking. And right now you're thinking of ways that they're very confrontational. But in a general sense, they're non-confrontational as long as you agree with the norm of what society says, right? That's why it's the you live your truth. I'm not going to disagree with how you live because that's your truth. Who am I to say how you should live your life? Non-confrontational in that sense. They have philanthropic mindsets, which means they have this strong desire to make a difference in the world, right? It's the collective. How are we going to be better as a society? How can I contribute more to society? You can think this is a good thing, right? This can be harnessed. This can be used for kingdom purposes, right? Not just what's a good cause, but what's a kingdom cause. And then they are very empathetic and inclusive. And we realize this, right? It's, again, going back to it's not me, it's we. Tell me how you feel. One time and maybe I shared this story before, I was really pouring my heart out to a young Gen Zer in California, and I was just really upset with him because he wasn't doing the things that he said that he was going to be doing. He wasn't really living a life on fire for God, and yet he had all the potential to do so, and I thought, I'm going to have a really good heart-to-heart with him. I'm just going to sit him down and tell him how I feel and use harsh language because he needs to hear it. And about halfway through that conversation, I looked across the table and I realized that he was empathizing with me and going, yeah, ooh. And how does that make you feel, right? Like, no, this isn't about me, dummy. This is about you. But one Gen Z distinctive is they all think they're little counselors. Every single one that I've met, they're all counselors. And they're laughing over here. These Gen Zers are like, yeah, that's me. Right? Even though they may not be in any position to counsel someone through, but that's what's ingrained within them. They're extremely empathetic, extremely inclusive. They have fluidity in thought, identity, and what they're interested in. In other words, it's this idea that change is a good thing, which may be distinguishing from other generations where you are set in routines, you are set in stability. With Gen Z, it could be anywhere, at any time. It doesn't matter if it's their self-identity. It doesn't matter if their work, their school. They like change, right? And this is one thing that we have to be conscious of as ministers, and myself as a youth pastor, is what can I do so that this doesn't become just routine, but it's also exciting and engaging, and I institute change, right? One thing about Gen Z, they love change. And then here's the final thing is they value relationships, but relationships that are more transactional. They want real friends and not deal friends. And that's a quote from a book by Tim Elmore. He says they want real friends, not deal friends. And this one actually surprised me because Gen Z, they're very ingrained with technology, right? Most of their friends are in social media. Most of their friends are virtual. But that has actually created within them a sense that it's not enough for me just to have, a friend that I talk to while I'm gaming. I want to have someone that I can look at face to face and have someone that actually understands me, sees me, someone that I can see, someone that I can counsel, right? And be a real friend to. Not just someone that I can use to get ahead in life, which maybe they've seen in previous generations. Right? What's going to be a real relationship? So think about this as Gen Z enters the workforce. If you're their boss, they want someone that's going to actually care for them, right? How can I help you? How can I help you succeed? How can I help you get ahead? Someone that's going to check in with them. And then they're also going to want, and this is going to be hard for some of you older folks, they also want to be there for you. How can I help you? Right? So, here's some things that we can do moving forward. Now we understand that some Gen Z and Gen Alpha distinctives, mostly Gen Z. Here's some things that we can do is we can table our assumptions and disagreements. table means set them down, let's have a conversation, let's seek to understand, right? I have a lot of assumptions and a lot of disagreements with other generations and Gen Z. Sorry, guys. There's things that you do that I'm not cool with, right? Why are you the way you are? But I'm willing to look past those things, table those things, because I see that there's a lot of value that you bring that I cannot bring to the gospel mission. I want to seek to understand. We need to recognize that they are the leaders of tomorrow, the largest generation of all time. Pretty soon, many of them are already entered the workforce. Pretty soon, they are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, which is a pretty daunting idea or fact when we think about it, right? These young folks who many of us tend to repel, or because we don't understand, we're just like, okay, I'm going to wipe my hands of it. No, these are the leaders of tomorrow. Many of them are already leading in some capacity. What are we doing today to equip them, elevate them as leaders? I tell you what is not going to work. It's not going to work to just fully reject them or tell them, hey, you're living this way. You need to do it like I did. Or back in my day, this is what we did. It's not going to work. They will reject you so fast. How can we be part of the solution? How can we help develop them into Gen Z leaders, not a leader that looks like me? They're going to value mentor-mentee relationships. I talked about this Generation Sunday. It's this transactional relationship, right? They value frequent check-ins from their boss or mentor. How can we utilize their tech savviness? Even I am so irrelevant, out of date when it comes to technology. Yeah. She says, amen. Yeah. How can I, as a youth pastor, youth leader, next gen pastor, pull in these Gen Z and say, hey, what can you teach me about this? What are some things that I'm missing, right? Even in our kids' rock room, I have Gen Z leaders running our tech. Because I'm going to show them like initially how to do it, but then it's, how can we make this better? I'm going to rely on you, right? And I would say the last couple of things are this, is we need to get them involved in missions. And I'm really proud to say that that's already happening here at LifeBridge. But there's just so much more we can do because this is their heart. This is the heartbeat of Gen Z, is missions, right? It may not be local church ministry like it's been done. It's going to be missions. How can we reach the lost and the broken? Utilize their care for others, but we translate into gospel-minded works. And then the last thing is education. What is going to be the most important thing to Gen Z? It's going to be something that matters to them, right? It's not just going to be gen ed studies. It's not going to be maybe even just a traditional business degree, something that matters. What can we offer them that says, hey, this is tailored to you. We can offer you an education, but we're going to tailor it to you. Tell us what you need. Tell us what you want to learn. And I will say this, a little shameless plug. At the Bridge College, that's what we're doing. We're bringing individual students in. We're saying, hey, how do you need to learn? What do you need to supplement what you're being taught in school? And that's what we're offering.
Thank you, Pastor Joe. Hi, church family. I'm going to talk like a millennial, so you have to listen quickly, okay? There's a lot of information, and I just want to give some highlights with this. So millennials, who are they and what helped shape them? Millennials were the first generation to actually come into adulthood in the new millennium. That's where they get their name. They're also called Generation Y. But they were born in the 1980s and 1990s, so they're approximately 27 to 40 years old. They became the largest generation up until their date. We heard that Generation Z is now the largest, but they were raised by a majority of parents that chose to prioritize families and children. So they grew up in a healthy economy where their parents had been able to shift. I don't beatbox, but it sounds like it. They were able to shift from working hard to get everything that their kids needed to now these parents are working to get everything their kids wanted, right? So there's that shift in that way. The parents of this generation of millennials strove more so to protect their kids from any type of pain. So that could be falling, that could be failure, that could be fretting, but there was this new mentality to protect them from all pain. And so with that, we saw the introduction of baby on board signs, right? We saw participation trophies, and we saw a plethora of buying options that came into this generation's time period. Millennials were the first to grow up with cell phones, flip phones, computers, the internet, dial-up and all, right? Which really meant, too, they were also the first generation that didn't need adults to get information, right? Think about that time, that shift. They could broadcast every thought and emotion, and they had immediate access to social contact, though they themselves are often isolated. Because change happens so fast, there's actually two subgroups that are a part of the millennial age period, which are the early millennials, those born in the 1980s, and the later millennials, those born in the early 1990s. So in the early millennials, the 1980s, they were considered to be more highly compassionate, activists. They viewed technology as a tool. They were more civic-minded. They're ambitious about the future, and they helped to accelerate growth. Now, the millennials and the later, born in the 1990s, they were considered more to be low empathy, slacktivists, which means that they may not physically go protest, but they'll change their picture on Instagram to support a certain cause. View technology as a necessity. They're more self-absorbed. And again, these are generalizations, okay? They're ambiguous about the future, and they matured later on in years. And so if you're born in the early 90s, you may be feeling pretty misunderstood right now, but the 80s, we're probably feeling like, please don't group us with them, right? And so anyway, as a whole, no matter these things, the environment that helped shape millennials developed in them also an ability to bring confidence into their jobs and have an openness to mentors, which is huge. Millennials are said to tend to possess energy, which helps invite momentum. They have tech sense, experience with teams, creativity, optimism, love of family, and an awareness of their influence. So what can millennials do? What can they bring to the church that benefits us all? There's a book by Mark Batterson called In a Pit with a Lion on a Snowy Day. And in his book, he highlights a story in 2 Samuel that talks about Benaiah. Benaiah, he didn't just elude a lion attack, but rather Benaiah, he chased down a lion into a pit. And despite snow and slippery ground, which we really can relate to right now, right? That part of it. But he caught the lion and he killed it. He ran after the lion. He went on the offensive and after the lion into a pit on a snowy day. The millennials are our Benaniahs. As a church, we need their confidence, their optimism, and their momentum to not just elude lions, but to go after them. And so as a church, that benefits all of us. In Generation X, who are they and what helped shape them? Generation X was born between 1965 and 1982. So they're approximately, again, depending on sources, they could be from 41 to 58 years old. And they found themselves sandwiched between two larger generations, the millennials we just talked about, and also the boomers. And so between these larger and often louder and more visible generations, the Gen X felt like they were in the shadow. And oftentimes they're referred to as the middle child. And so when they came on the scene, when Gen X came on the scene, the economy was unstable. They had felt the effects of 4 different assassinations within just 5 years. There was skepticism of the Vietnam War and Watergate scandals that were being viewed on the TV and discussed by their parents. They had watched the effects of huge inflations, the Cold War, the AIDS epidemic, and the introduction of the birth pill and abortion rights also grew during their upbringing, as well as divorce rates. Both of these were on the incline. And whether because parents were working for the first time ever, or because there were more single-family homes, parent homes, the generation also learned to fend for themselves with less adult supervision than they had ever had before. So it's no wonder, right, that as a whole, Gen X might find themselves and are often perceived as cynical or jaded or skeptical or renegades, right? This is just what they grew up with. But on a flip side, the positives, it can be said that their environment helped shape them, holding with it the potential of teaching them how to ask tough questions, right? They weren't just satisfied with how things were. They asked hard questions. They had a desire to be real, to be authentic. It sounds a lot like Generation Z, Generation X does. They became critical thinkers, resourceful, adaptable, hardworking, and they helped bring a balance between pessimism and idealism, and also for the first time between work and life. So with that, Gen X, if you're in the 40s or in your 50s, we need you as a church. What can Generation X bring that benefits the church as a whole? We need your experiences and the wisdoms that has helped shape you through these experiences. And we need you to model it for us, to live the message in your workplaces, in your church family, at home, what God deems as authentic and true and His view. We're watching and we're being impacted. So we need you to lead through example, and we need you to lead through relationships. Surveys by Maxwell Leadership revealed that, quote, young people actually want a relationship with older generations. They just don't know how to ask for it. That's huge. Know that it's a desire. And also in his book, A New Kind of Diversity, Elmore writes, they aren't asking, and this fits right in with what Pastor Joe said, what he said and said. He said, they aren't asking for a lecture, but they are asking to swap stories and to learn from those, this is key, who believe in them and who can ask good questions to make them think better. Some of my most impactful relationships have been just that, have been these. So we need you, Gen X, to lead through modeling, to lead through relationships, to genuinely care for our younger people, to ask questions, and to draw out. Okay, Boomer.
Thank you, Pastor Joe and Pastor Sarah, for enlightening us today. I really wanted to hone in on these younger spectrums of the generations, because the truth is, probably a couple of years ago, if you had looked at the demographics of LifeBridge, we were predominantly a builder and boomer church, pretty good group of Gen X, and then we got real thin when it came to millennials and to Gen Z, and then Alpha. I'm really happy to tell you that over this last couple of years, those dynamics are shifting. And the wonderful thing is, we've not been losing our builders and boomers or our Gen Xers or those that were already here from the younger, but we're starting to add more in the Gen X and in the millennial and now in Gen Z and in the Alpha generations. And so I think we are truly on the right path for this to truly be a multi-generational church. And I'm very grateful to Pastor Joe and Pastor Becca and Pastor Sarah for what they're doing as younger leaders in this church to help Pastor Grace and I to take the church in a direction that I believe is strategic for the time we're living in. Let me take just a couple of minutes, though, to talk about baby boomers, R1. Baby boomers were those that were born from roughly 45, 46 to around 1964. I'm a baby boomer, kind of in the middle of that. Pastor Grace is barely a baby boomer. She almost made it to Gen X another year. But basically, we both would fall in this category. And it was post-war. If you think about where America was during this time frame, World War II was over. It was the beginning of the expansion of suburbs. It became a time where most people were looking to have a house, not an apartment. And so there was a boom of building houses. Families began to have a car. And you can watch as that progressed to where it became 2-car garages and 2 cars or multiple cars as the world began to shift. And that's been the lifetime of those who are a part of the baby boomer generation. So it created this sense of hope, this expansion, and this change. That change was a constant for us. Some of you who were here when I first came to town remember a word that I used to use frequently. I now apologize, I'm a baby boomer. The word was flexible. Remember that? Because I just believe change can happen. And that good change is worth what it takes to produce it. And so basically, that's a high value in that generation. So we tend to foster idealism. We're pretty idealistic of what we think ought to be. And then along with that, we have very high expectations of what we want others to have. And that's why you have a lot of baby boomers that's deep in debt, because they want to have all the conveniences. They want a bigger house. They want nicer cars. They need a spare car. They need all the toys, the bells and whistles. I just got a new snowblower this year. It's a battery powered. Oh my goodness, it even has hand warmers in the handlebars. Oh, God's good. But basically, what happened, they also became the generation, or I should say, we became the generation that began to have this idea of challenging authority. I remember this phrase when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, do not trust anyone over the age of 30. I'm a lot older than that now. My advice to you is do not trust anyone over the age of 30. No, I'm teasing. But the truth is that competitiveness became very strong. How do you have a nicer, you get a nice car, you're happy about it, and the neighbor gets a newer one. What do you got to do? You got to go get one to top them. It's always keeping up. It's always getting ahead. This is really the generation that fueled all of the designer ideas that now dominate our world. There was a time when you could just have a pair of jeans that came from Walmart. Now you pay really good money, and I'm just fascinated when I see folks come into our church and they look like they went to Goodwill to get their jeans, and I realize they may have paid $150 for those jeans because there's a label you can't even see behind the belt. So it just became a different world. The characteristics of this generation is we love to tell stories. Have you noticed that around here? Job experience. We've learned some valuable lessons through what we've done in life. We're aware that there's a lot of pitfalls in life. The divorce rate's been very high among baby boomers. And then we've learned that we have some life experience, and sometimes we can be helpful to others. And so coaching can be a good thing. It can also be a nuisance to others when they don't want to be coached. But the boomer generation has a lot to offer, and as we are beginning to move into the older years, trying to define what do we still look like and how do we still function. I'm reading a book right now called Strength to Strength, and in it talks about how as you get older, you sometimes have trouble. Last Sunday morning, I know Danny's name as well as I know my own, and I decided to say something in the middle of the service, and my mind went totally blank when I tried to say Danny's name. Well, I read this book. This may not be true, but I believe it is. According to the author of that book, if you can picture as you get older, your mind is like a library that's getting more and more books in it. So it isn't that you've lost the books that are there. They're just in places with a lot more books. And the librarian has a lot more to go to and is a little slower when it comes time to pull information out. And that's why you're in a conversation with somebody and you try to say a name, and 3 hours after you've left the conversation, the name comes to you. Have any of you ever had that happen that are in this range? Yeah. And so when you begin to understand that, we're trying to figure out how do we still function the way we thought we should, and where are we fitting in what's happening in the grand scheme of things. And then there's the generation that to me are just so valuable as a part of our church and our culture, and that's the builder generation. And that's those that were born World War II or before. If you think about this, most of the folks who are part of the builder generation experienced two major traumas in America that affected the whole world. 1929, the stock market crashed, and the 1930s were marked by the Great Depression. And it marked how the people who grew up do things. That's why my mother saved newspapers to wrap stuff in, and we never had paper towels. You washed the towels you had. That's why, this is pretty gross, my dad would say, anybody else need to use the bathroom before we flush it? I now understand it wasn't just because he was a gross old man. He was a builder trying to save money. Because builders lived through that. And then World War II. World War II, guys went off to war for the most part. You know what happened? Women began to do factory jobs. It was the beginning of changing our workforce from just a male workforce in America because of the necessity of World War II. And that shaped those who came up in that. And basically, they were raised in an environment where you didn't ask questions. Have you ever heard this statement? God said it, I believe it, that settles it. That's a boomer understanding. Doesn't relate very much to a millennial. A builder, God said it, that settles it. My parents said it, that settles it. You didn't question anything. You did what you were told. If you would, it was pretty much a world of shut up and work. Can any of you from that generation say amen? That's how you were raised. Became the silent generation. Man, what a strong work ethic. That's why it's the builder generation. You worked hard. You generally had more than one job, or you maybe farmed on the side. You did something. You had some kind of a side business that you did. But there was just this strong sense of work and value that you had in making sure that you were providing and that you were stewarding whatever resources you had very carefully. So characteristics, there's some powerful ones. Humility, gratitude, being a good worker, kindness, resilience, and resourcefulness. That's really the characteristics that mark what drove that builder generation. And so I think it's important for us to understand these distinctions between generations. And I especially think it's a challenge for those of us who may be in the builder or boomer or even in the Gen X to try to relate, because the world in the last 40 years has shifted so much that there's far more commonality between boomers and builders, and even Gen X is kind of the pivot generation than what would be the norms of a world for a millennial or for a Gen Z or Alpha, because it's so shifted in this 40 years and what happens. Now, what I want to be careful is this. I don't want to overgeneralize these understandings. There's some basic characteristics that are true no matter what generation you are. We've all sinned and come short of the glory of God. And every one of us have been created with the power that created the universe inside of us. We were born to be in relationship with God, doesn't matter what generation you are. And God wants to be in relationship with you no matter what. And even though if you're a builder, you may think more like a millennial in some ways just because of the dynamics of whatever happened in your life. Or interesting, what I found out a few years ago when we began to lead youth ministry here is I began to find out that a lot of Gen Z really have a lot of common ground and values with a boomer. and that we frequently had great conversations when we talked about things. What I found out, they were smarter than me. I remember talking to Andrew Phillips one day, and Andrew was just spouting all this stuff up. And I said, how do you know that? And I mean, I'm talking about scientific knowledge, and I knew enough to know that he knew what he was talking about, but how could he, a kid that young, know that much? Well, I watched the Discovery Channel a lot. You know, I mean, all of a sudden I realized he's absorbed a lot of information that wasn't even available to me. If I'd had a smartphone when I was in school, I would have done so well on tests. But let us talk about how do we maximize the generations. I think there's three things I want us to think of in light of that. The first one is repairing the breach. Isaiah 58, 11 and 12. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought and strengthen your bones. You shall be like a watered garden and like a spring of water, whose waters do not fail. Those from among you shall build the old waste places. You shall rise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in. Interestingly, as the age of information has enlarged, as technology has made it so simple to go places and to stay in touch and have more spare time to do other things because of what you can have done for you that you used to would have had done yourself. We have become a very broken culture. The hard-working builder generation, the high desire to achieve boomer generation, you know what we created? We created workaholics and became workaholics. We had a culture where you needed to work 60 hours a week, and by the time you got home, how much time do you have left for family? And then as both genders begin to be out in the workplace, you know what else began to happen? The fabric that had held the home together in previous generations, because it was changing, and nobody said, here's how you need to function, it's been changing, so everybody's trying to figure it out, and guess what began to happen? Marriages begin to fall apart. People to begin to get involved with someone in their workplace or someone that they had met somewhere. And so we saw divorce rate increase and increase. We saw that need to work, and that got transferred down to whatever generation. You got to work. So you had more and more latchkey kids in the afternoon after school. And you had more and more single-parent homes. And as a result, the very fabric of our society has been torn deeply. So I believe this. It's time for us to begin to say, God, what can we do to begin to bring wholeness? Does it mean that we can erase what's happened from divorce? There was one particularly religious denomination that was so hard on the subject of divorce that if you became a believer and you had been married before you were saved and you divorced and now you had gotten married again, literally to be right with the church, you were supposed to divorce the new person you had married and go back to the other person that you had divorced previously. I know someone personally that wrecked their world because you're trying to fix something the wrong way. And we've had so many ways. How do we do this so that we do it in a healthy way and we accept some realities that are not going to change, and yet we hold fast to the truth of God's Word in how we work through? How do we manage that? How do we turn diversity into a promise rather than a threat? Man, it's such a diverse world in so many ways. One of the things that's very interesting, I haven't looked in recent days about this, but I do know that a few years ago, the timeline was 2050, when being a white Anglo will mean you're part of a minority. That's a drastic change in American culture. And here's the thing, it's not a bad change. It's an uncomfortable change for people who've used to be in the majority. How do we embrace that and celebrate it rather than fear it? How do we understand when we all get to heaven, there are going to be a lot of folks from every tribe on earth in heaven? How do we celebrate ethnicity? How do we celebrate different views? We're still trying to work out in our culture, how do we handle some of the gender diversities that have become so complex? I'm not in any way advocating that we change biblical truth or try to devalue biblical truth, but we're going to have to understand, how do we do this in a way that God would do it? How do we do this so we hold values and love people? I believe we can do it. I believe God will let us. It's a repairing of the breach. And then how can we operate in conjunction with this from a platform of truth and grace, so that we don't compromise the truth, but we understand the balance of grace that covers it all. We are all equal at the foot of the cross. Doesn't matter what. And in Christ, all things are made new. We've been called to the ministry of reconciliation. I have some understanding of what that means. I think God's going to teach us more and more about it in the days that are ahead. And as a church, I pray that we will be a reconciling church that balances truth and grace. How do we step out of our comfort zones? Isaiah 41:10, fear not, I'm with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Man, we like comfort, don't we? I'm so glad that the weather got a little warmer this week. Made it easier to get up this morning and get out of the house and come to church. Some of you are still tucked in that are with us online this morning. That's okay. But I'm going to tell you, this week there is a warm front coming in. It's going to hit 40 before the week's over. How do we step out of comfort zones? I think part of it is we begin to gain an appreciation for a healthy view of two words, acceptance and tolerance. In recent years, particularly in the gender area and understanding human sexuality, the word acceptance has become very important. And part of that blame lays at the foot of conservative evangelical legalism. Because as there begin to be kids who grew up and then they begin to go away from what were the values that were taught, instead of the church finding a way to love them while holding standards, frequently families alienated and said, we don't want you to even come back home anymore. We totally disowned them. Sure glad God didn't disown me when I wasn't thinking the way He was. He still loved me. Acceptance became very important. And in the process of trying to deal with that, a word that became a bad word, an incorrect word, was tolerance. Because folks so badly wanted to be accepted, and they thought acceptance meant that we said, whatever you do, we're good with that. And yet the truth is, there are people I love who do things that I tolerate. I will not at this moment give her the microphone, but I promise you, Grace loves me. If you would ask her to describe for you what tolerance means, she would proceed to tell you some of the things that I do that she does not accept, but because she accepts me, she tolerates. And that's part of what we've got to learn how to do. How do we learn that acceptance sometimes means we tolerate things we don't like, even though we don't accept them the same way the person who's wanting that acceptance? I think that's going to be so key to the church as we move into the future. And then how do we look through the eyes of Jesus? What would Jesus do? And we're going to do this with Spirit-led relationships. 1 Thessalonians 5:9. God's not destined us for wrath, but to possess salvation through our Lord Jesus, the Anointed One. He gave His life for us so that we may share in resurrection life in union with Him, whether we're awake or asleep. Because of this, encourage the hearts of your fellow believers and support one another just as you have already been doing. I encourage you to cultivate a lifestyle with peers and mentors that speak truth and love into your life. If you've got someone who's criticizing you all the time, you may need to find some other peers to hang out with, if their criticism is not truly constructive. But don't be closed to people who tell you things you need to hear you don't want to hear if they do it in a loving way. We need that in our lives. We need mentors that we can look up to that have been further down the road than we are. And then intentionally develop relationships where you're able to be a mentor. Learning to be a mentor doesn't mean that you're superior, doesn't mean you talk down. It means that you help, by more than anything, live in such a way that people say, I want to live like that. My mother never talked down to me. My dad talked down to me all the time. But my mother totally shaped who I am today because she knew how to gently live in front of me what it was to be a godly believer. Intentionally cultivate relationships outside of your defined generation. We pick friends who like what we like. We pick friends who want to go where we want to go, who eat the food we like to eat, who want to have the recreation we have. What relationships are you cultivating with someone who's really different than you? And particularly because of what we're talking about, generationally, what are you doing to build a relationship that goes beyond the fact that, yeah, those are my kids, those are my grandkids. I don't understand them, but they're my kids or grandkids, so I'm somehow going to put up with them, even though I don't like what they're doing. Well, there's a great way to look at life, isn't it? What if you bothered to get to know how they think and why they think that way and why they aren't relating to you and what you could do differently that could change that? It sure is quite. I'm telling you, there's richness in getting to know other generations. This week, our good friend and actually my coach, who, by the way, is a Gen X, just above being a millennial, Sally Stitzer, she's been a huge blessing in my life from the understanding she has, the challenges that she gives to me, that even though she's almost young enough, she is young enough to be my daughter, there's times that what she tells me I need to hear. Been very helpful. She said to me the other day, she says, hey, I've got somebody I want you to meet. So I met this wonderful young lady who would be right on the top end of Gen Z, who his name is Lydia, grew up here in Fort Wayne, has for the last several months been living in Barcelona, Spain, because she really believed that God is calling her to go there and to be involved in a house church. Never been involved in a house church in her life, but she just sensed God told her, I want you to do that. I want you to do it in Barcelona, Spain. So she quit her job, sold her house, been very successful young single woman here in Fort Wayne, and moved to Barcelona, Spain. Didn't know anybody. Barcelona is 1% evangelical Christian. Got there, was talking to someone, and just from what they said, she wondered if maybe they were Christian. Got to know them better, and they asked her why she was there. She told them, and they said, well, you know, there was a guy, he said, my wife and I and two other couples moved to Barcelona from Austin, Texas, because God told us to come here and plant a house church. How did God figure out all the millions of people in Barcelona to connect her with that guy? So she's been working with them. You know what's cool? Recently, they have planted their second house church, which is Spanish-speaking, because Barcelona has people from cultures all over the world. Heavily Muslim influence there, and yet God's beginning to do something. So I met Lydia the other day. She's back home. You know what she's doing? She's preparing to go out as a missionary and is in the process of building her support base so that she can go back to Barcelona and continue to build house church. Now, here's the wonderful thing about me meeting her. I think there's ways I'm going to be able to help her. But it's also interesting that as the regional pastor for Foursquare, I now have 2 different places where there are house churches that are a part of our region. And I don't know much about house churches. I'm trying to help. I'm trying to bring resource people into that. And I thought, isn't it funny? Because now I have a connection who is doing it the way it ought to be done. And the results they're achieving are the things that you want to achieve. I now have a new resource. So not only do I think I'm going to be able to help Lydia, but Lydia's going to help me. That's what God's wanting to do. Because there's things Lydia knows better than I do. And there's also risk Lydia is willing to take I'm not willing to take. What would we do if we begin to think that way about every millennial, every Gen Z, every Alpha who's in our church? What would God begin to do to explode us? I just believe God has great things he wants to do. Okay, I want to quickly close this out. Here's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to give you 3 challenges. First one is, I challenge you to intentionally connect with someone from a different generation without any agenda. Figure out how you're going to do that. Or make a connection. And if nothing else, say to the millennial Gen Z person, you know, our pastor is driving me nuts. And he told me I ought to get to know someone your age. Would you be willing to just spend some time talking to me? And then just start asking him some stuff. Don't barrage him too badly, but ask him, hey, where do you go to school? What do you think about what's happening? And then when they tell you an idea that blows you away, it's not the moment to be a coach. It's the moment to be a friend. Develop a relationship. And the second challenge, intentionally connect with a second person. Oh, more than one? Yeah. That's at least 2 generations removed from your generation. And these are also for no matter whether you're a builder, boomer, X. This is for millennials. This is for those that are Gen Z as well. I challenge you to take these 2 challenges and begin to live into them. Now, the third and final challenge, quickly, and I want Pastor Sarah to come. She's going to close out the service. Book that both Pastor Joe and Pastor Sarah referred to is a book that, again, my friend Sally Stitzer, I hate to read. Sally said to me one day, she says, there's a book you need to read, and I bought it for you. Now I'm obligated to read it. It's been powerful. It's called A New Kind of Diversity. If you need to get the name of that, I'll be glad to share it with you, or we can get it to you from the office. It's written by Tim Elmore, who worked for many years with John Maxwell. He wrote it as a secular book for people in the business world, but he's a strong believer and it has strong Christian principles. And it's a book about how to understand how the differences in how people think from whatever generation they're coming from when they're trying to work together in the workplace. I really would love it if 83% of the people in this church would decide to read that book. Actually, I'd love it if 100% did. Because here's the thing. We do far better when we understand what we're trying to do. And I'd really encourage you to do that before you do the first 2 challenges I gave you. So that because if you do the first 2 challenges and then do the third one, you may get embarrassed when you start reading some of the things you did, that it's going to say to you, this won't be a good idea if you're trying to relate to that generation. If you want to have a real good understanding, and for some of us, it may help you with your kids, with your grandkids, with nieces, nephews, younger people in your family. And some of you who are younger, it may help you to understand some of us old people and how to deal with us and why we say the things, why we look at you and say, get a job. So let's move into all that God has. I believe this is going to be an incredible year of Generation Mission at LifeBridge. You ready for it?